Don Samad, and Don's a good friend of mine. And I was over talking to Don. We were sitting in his living room, and he said, "Gee, I've got an old gun that you might like." He says, "Not worth much, but it is." And that's it here. And I got another friend right there, and that's Don Akers. And he's a super machinist for sure. And he helped me restore that. And so I didn't really know what kind of a gun it was. It sort of looked like it might have been military, but it looked like it was a sporter as well. So I got interested in it, and I did a lot of research, and some of it might, hopefully you'll be interested in. So what I found was, after the Revolutionary War, General George Washington's army, you know, they were all farmers and they all had jobs. They all went home. And we had no protection in the country. George Washington's administration passed the Militia Act of 1792. And this is a small part of the Militia Act, but it's the interesting part. Don't bother to read it now, I'll just run over it, but when you get home, maybe you'd want to take a look at it. So after the Revolutionary War was over, the United States found itself depleted of arms, and the Militia Act of 1792 required all able-bodied men, any able-bodied man between 18 and 45, to own a gun, and a lot of other stuff. And it's kind of unbelievable, really, because in those days, you know, nobody had any money or anything, but they have to arm themselves with a good musket or a firelock, and the musket must have an iron or a steel ramrod. And the reason is, the ramrod is used to load the gun. The wooden ramrods, like sporting rifles, they were apt to snap, especially in the heat of the battle. You know, you get into a battle with somebody, you don't want to break your ramrod because, you know, you're effectively a dead one. So, a good bayonet with a scabbard, and the bayonet goes right on the front sight. That's what made me think that this had some sort of a military background, because the front sight is pretty square, and that's made to lock a bayonet on. And let's see, you have to have 2 spare flints. And pretty interesting, you've heard of flint and steel. This is a piece of flint here, and it's been napped down to the right shape to fit into the jaws of the chuck there. And when flint hits steel, it creates a pretty good spark, and that's what ignites these old guns. All right, so you need a brush, a priming wire, a knapsack, a cartridge box, 24 cartridges. Now, when they talked about cartridges in these days, it wasn't a bullet like they think of it. It's a piece of paper with black powder in it and a projectile, and it's wrapped up, you know. That was their idea of a cartridge in those days. And a proper amount of black powder. And so what was developed from this act was known as the New England Militia Musket. And there was no particular patent to them, but they want good solid locks on them. And funny, the locks primarily came from England, who we were fighting at the time. And the barrels, and this barrel as well, came from a English musket, a Brown Bess it was called. And when the English ran out on us after we had whipped them, you know, in Boston, they threw their guns down, and they were picked up, and the barrels were cut off, and they saved the barrels from them, and they were used to build these type of muskets. And these are a lot different than a musket, you know, a musket like the Brown Bess. It had steel barrel bands around it that were very long, very heavy. These are more like a sporting gun. And they're what's called buck and ball guns. If you were fighting a war with it, you'd use a ball, you know, to shoot people with. But if you wanted to go out and shoot a rabbit, you'd use birdshot or some other kind of shot like that. And I know that because this barrel is marked with a P, which indicated it was military surplus. And that's where they came from. And they were assembled in New England by various gunsmiths. And they always had brass trigger guards, brass butt plates, and right on top of the wrist here where your thumb goes, that was a thumb plate, and that was a requirement that they had it. I don't know, I guess just place to put your thumb. And what makes it interesting on this particular gun is the guy's got his initials on it and New Hampshire. So this gun was used in this state. And if I could get a hold of all the list of everybody that was in the militias at that time, I probably would know who it was. It's a 69 caliber, which is the same thing as a 16 gauge.
Wow.
And the other thing I found that was kind of interesting, this gun is serial number 18. This is a blow up of that right there. And the initials are scratched in the MWB in New Hampshire. And this I assume is a regimental mark. But it kind of got scratched up, so it's a little bit hard to see, but I thought that was pretty interesting. And the other thing that was kind of neat is this is serial number 18. It was marked with Roman numerals. The wood is marked, the bottom of the barrel is marked, and oddly enough, the front sight right on top of it is marked. You got to really look at it. I looked this gun over closely with magnification just to find all this
So
stuff.
they all have number 18?
No, this is a serial number.
Oh,
This was the 18th one that was built. And
That's one more.
this gun is in phenomenal condition. This is a Revolutionary War gun. Just look at it. This finish that you see was put on in George Washington's day. Now that's pretty darn unusual. And you see it's brass. It has the brass butt plate. And the ramrod was made by Don Akers there.
Right on.
And did a great job on it too. And I'll show you the flint, how it works. This is all the spark gate. So how it all works, they put a little powder in the pan there, and they close the piston down. And then when the flint hits it, it pops that up, and those sparks ignite that little bit of powder, and there's a hole that burns through into the main charge there. And when that goes off, drives the ball out the barrel, and we're off. So, to me, this is pretty interesting. Yeah.
Have you used that gun?
I fired it twice. It shoots just like a champ.
Haha.
It really does.
Richard, how much would a gun like that cost in terms of, in its time, Revolutionary War time, not in dollars and cents of today, but like
In those days,
relative to like a man's, what a guy made in a day's work or on a week's work or something like
well,
that?
you know,
Was
in
it a
those
very
days,
expensive
in
thing?
those days, you know, a day's pay was probably like 50 cents, let's say,
Right.
something like that. So you're probably looking at a few dollars here. A good example of that is the David Dutton clock. You've all looked at David Dutton clocks. Now, just look at them. If next month, if you allow me, I'll come up and I'll give you a little display of those.
Oh, twist our arms.
And I'll show you how they run. It's just amazing, it really is. And Don there knows all about that because he's repaired many of them.
Ah.
And at any rate, the David Dutton clock delivered by stagecoach, by wagon, whatever, was, if I remember right, was like $4.40.
Yeah.
$4.40 for a clock with a mirror and a glass and a terrific movement and all those weights. And but I guess if you're making 50 cents a day, you know, it would probably makes sense. But
Right,
you know,
right, exactly.
let's see. One other thing that I will, if you don't mind me pointing this at you.
No.
This, if anybody's interested in looking at it, it's a company order from the captain to his sergeant in this militia. The captain lived in Milford, and he was a blacksmith. And what this is telling the sergeant to do is to get all these people lined up and go to a tavern. They probably have a few pops, you know, and then to, you know, practice shooting and marching and all the things that we do in the military. And this is pretty interesting too. And there's 2 pages to it, and I blew up some of the pages so you can see the names. Some of these names are local names. Clark and Gutterson, that was the, lived up the other end of town, the Guttersons, and, so if anybody's interested, this is right here, and you're welcome to take it home, read it, bring it back, whatever, but, so that was the militia, and that's kind of a quickie, but I don't want to bore you too much.
Good job, Richard, thank you.
I thought it was pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Is this the same musket that you loaned us for the parade?
No.
Not for the parade, for
No.
the,
No, you
oh,
have,
it's a different.
We had a
one.
different one.
This one's way more valuable than that one.
well, this
Well.
one was,
Yeah,
George Washington's.
That's a real.
yeah.
And the other one was one that you made, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
The other thing was, I brought a couple other things.
Yeah. Let's see them.
This is a powder horn with the powder was kept in, and that's kind of a neat one. And the other thing was they were required, as, oh yeah, the other thing, I guess I didn't go over the whole list, but they had to have a horse as well, a maintained horse with a saddle, and they had to have a pouch to carry all the goodies in, and they were required. Oh, and the other thing was, if they decided they didn't want to do this, they were fined 1 year's salary.
Whoa.
And exactly how you figure that out, like a person who's a farmer, how do you figure out what his salary is in a year? But anyway, that's the way the act was written. You don't do it,
Wow,
you're out of a year's pay.
wow, wow.
And, okay, one more thing, they all had their own flag, and this is, there's 6 states in New England, right? Okay, they had a little pine tree and this was the regimental flag.
Cool.
And it was the regiment in Milford was the 5th. They were light infantry. Milford regiment was light infantry. And it looked like about 30 people in it.
Those folks had to have horses as well?
They did. They had to have
Even
a
though
horse,
they were
had ready to
infantry.
go.
Really?
And the only, I tried to find, something that they had done. The only thing I could find was some of the farmers in Pennsylvania decided they weren't going to pay their taxes anymore. So they put up the militia and they rode their horses out to Pennsylvania. And they had a standoff with these Pennsylvania farmers. And they put on a big show for them, and at the end they gave up and said,
Chase
okay,
Rebellion.
we'll pay our taxes.